Sydney International Airport's about to launch its new master plan out to 2045, and there's some big increases in volumes.
Sydney Airport on the edge of Botany Bay is going through a huge transformation. We're talking moving to 72.6 million passengers over the next 20 years. Freight tonnage is also going skyward. This is going to have huge impacts. We're talking new and expanded terminals, larger plane sizes. It's going to have big impact on airport noise around the city, and also it's going to impact this pile of spaghetti that the airport currently calls a road network. While there's a lot of desire to grow, geography is against them, with Botany Bay to the south and then a lot of swampy industrial land up the other three sides and then encased by a heap of motorways. While land was reclaimed in the 90s to facilitate runway 3, that's not an option this time.
And you've got to kind of wonder, how can a geographically constrained airport increase its capacity so aggressively?
First up, we've got terminal expansion.
More capacity at the terminals, a better construction.
So when we're looking at the master plan, the big ticket item is the expansion of the gates between Terminal 2 and 3, creating a super terminal. This terminal will start to do international flights as well as its current role doing domestics. We could see across the airport up to a dozen new gates, increasing capacity. Now, in addition to this, we're also going to see a lot more freight handling infrastructure moving in to help facilitate my Temu purchases.
Freight numbers are going to increase by 40%.
The next great way to increase capacity is to have bigger planes that can hold more people. Now, there was hardly ever any A380s hauling into Sydney. The planes were just too big, capacity of 800, horrible fuel efficiency and 4 engines. But what we're going to see is a huge amount more of the equivalent of the A350. Much smaller plane, 2 engines, but still holding around 400 passengers. These will become the main workhorses, and you'll see a lot fewer narrow-body jets and turboprops. And then you can always utilise what you have a little bit more effectively. And by global standards, Sydney is quite inefficient. There are a lot of gates that sit unoccupied. And you can see it's jam-packed in the mornings and pretty close to that in the evenings. But around the shoulders and in the middle of the day, there's just not that many flights. There are certain cities around the world which work perfectly for these time slots, and that's where you'll see Sydney Airport start to target. So at this point, we're talking about more aeroplanes that are larger, which make more noise at more times of the day and night.
So what will this mean for noise in your neighbourhood? The current plan sees the flight paths spread out to spread the noise across the city and not have it impact one neighbourhood all too much. However, with more flights coming in and larger planes on average, you're going to have a lot more early morning wake-ups.
So while the A380, the loudest plane, will not feature too much, there will be a lot more planes, so this noise will be happening a lot more frequently. Also, what we're looking at here is the actuals for last quarter in 2025 versus what they're approved for and what they're then asking for. So there's a big difference between actuals and maximum capacity being requested. Although, once we get out into the 2030s and Western Sydney Airport's second runway opens, all these flight paths are likely to be reworked completely. It's all up in the air. And don't be surprised if you start to see Sydney International Airport trying to loosen the restrictions of their curfew in order to compete with Western Sydney. The airport was subject to a takeover during the pandemic, and the private consortium of owners would love to get rid of the curfew.
The airport has a constructive plan around Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, but it's hard to take it seriously when they're excluding Scope 3, which is all the jet fuel. As a country, Australia doesn't really have a low-carbon jet fuel alternative, which means all of the goals of eventually getting carbon neutral by 2050 are somewhat hollow without that technology available.
You can see from the pie chart, essentially all the emissions carbon-wise for the airport are Scope 3. And within that Scope 3 emissions, everything but avionic fuel is a rounding error. This is why this has to be such a focus for the airport and the country as a whole in terms of decarbonising their supply chain. Now, there's a lot of materials carbon-conscious biofuel can be made from. Things like sugarcane and seed oils, algae, waste and landfill. Australia's got a lot of capacity for these. It's the processing plants that we're really lacking.
We really need to find a way of manufacturing sustainable aviation fuel in Australia.
There's an entire section on ground infrastructure, essentially how are you going to get to and from the airport when there's this much traffic around. Relatively underwhelming, a few extra car parks, the hope that that the state government will fork out and pay for the reconfiguration of a few intersections and extra lanes, which I think is unlikely considering there's so much extra capacity about to come online at Western Sydney Airport. Western Sydney Airport at full build out will be 80 million in capacity, essentially twice the size that Kingford Smith Sydney International is today. While this is a highly ambitious plan from Sydney Airport, it's hard to see the state government getting fully behind it when you consider how jam-packed the place is already of anyone who tries to get in and out of there. Because it's an airport that's been expanded and built upon over the last 100 years, it really is a patchwork of a master plan and has a large number of bottlenecks that just won't be able to be solved under the current plan. Wouldn't be surprised if you start to see state government directing more of that growth out to Western Sydney Airport. But time will tell, and it'll be very interesting to watch. Just so happens that Western Sydney also has its master plan out at the moment. If you'd be interested in us doing something on that and doing a contrast and compare, let us know. Thanks for watching.